Welcome to the Wisdom That Breathes channel. Along with our YouTube content here, we also have universal wisdom that we share on the Keshava Swami YouTube channel. Be sure to join our Wisdom That Breathes community, where we have regular community calls and empowering courses that you can benefit from. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi everyone, my name is Aditya Garg, and today I want to start off by asking you all a question. Is happiness an inside job? When we look at the stats, when we look at the reports coming out of years of research, what we see is that people have been getting less and less happy over time. That means more and more people are reporting that they're actually unhappy. And this really strikes me as surprising because how can this be? We've come such a long way in terms of technology, medicine, access to clean water, access to good shelter, sanitation, literacy, all metrics that we consider to be catalysts to human civilization are going up. And yet, despite all these worldly comforts going up, our happiness as a global population is going down. So why is this? This brings us to something I like to call the happiness paradox. We have more than ever before, and yet we are, as a population, are reporting to be less happy. So let's actually talk about how this happens. Step one, we go and we acquire material comforts or some material luxuries, right? So for example, let's go with getting the latest version of an iPhone. It's faster, it takes better selfies. Siri now has an AI component built in, right? So this novelty does bring us some level of happiness. It turns some heads when we walk down the hallway, and we get to be the center of everyone's attention for a little bit. And that's when this novelty starts to wear off. We start to use our phones the same way as we did previously, and we are no longer that attention. People's attention starts to shift, and we are who we are before we even got the phone. And so this temporary pleasure and unlasting or short-lasting happiness actually brings out that same insecurity, maybe even anxiety, right? And then it starts to dawn on us that, you know what, this actually has stopped bringing us happiness. It stopped bringing us what we were looking for. And it leads us back to square one, where we feel unsatiated, unhappy, and start to look for the next gadget. So we go back into that circle where we try to acquire materialistic milestones. The happiness paradox is that the more we compete to acquire material possessions and comforts, the more we are actually left disappointed because they don't satisfy our inner longing. So this vicious cycle continues time and time again, and the question comes, okay, how do I break out of this cycle? Is there a version of me or a version of reality where I can actually get genuine, lasting happiness? And this actually brings us to the problem. See, the whole issue is that I hear some background noise. Okay. The whole issue is that we pursue goals and comforts based on some imposed identity rather than a real identity. And let me actually qualify that statement. Imagine a fish believes itself to be a lion, and so it decides that it's now going to live on the ground in the African savannah. Will it survive? It will actually suffocate and die very easily. In order for that fish to be happy, it needs to first recognize its identity as a fish and then align its environment so that in a way that it's conducive to its real identity, aka the water. And then in that environment, it will be happy. And so when we don't know who we are, we try to align our environment to a version of us that does not exist or that is rooted in some false sense of identity, and that's where the problem comes. And so the solution or you can say the path to genuine happiness is first understanding who we really are, correct self-identification. Then reassessment of our happiness, reassessment of our environment based on our genuine identity. And step number three, we then direct our activities with that reassessment and go for it. Okay, so let's actually take a look at what that looks like. Who are we? That question is something that has plagued humanity since the dawn of time, right? In today's day and age, there's so much segregation and conflict based on this question of identity and the differences that exist. But the ancient Vedic scriptures tell us of a different story. According to the ancient scriptures, like the Bhagavad Gita, like the Upanishads, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, we are at our core spirit souls. So beyond our genders, our sexual orientations, race, nationalities, ethnicities, we are at the end of the day spiritual beings. And we don't need to have an out-of-body experience to see this. Just think to yourself in the course of a day how much your body changes. In the morning, we are a different weight. At the evening, we're a different weight. How our mind goes from one thought to another, how our senses are constantly moving and getting attracted by one object and another. And yet, we get to experience as individuals all of these changes without necessarily changing ourselves. Imagine how many different personalities would come about just in 24 hours if we were genuinely our bodies, our minds, or our senses. And so this thought that we actually distinct from all these sort of identifications is very easy for us to understand, very practical for us to understand. And so the first point is that understanding that we're actually the spirit soul. The next question comes, okay, if I'm the spirit soul, what will actually make me happy? Material comforts, material acquisitions can certainly bring a certain level of happiness to our material selves, our body, mind, and senses. But beyond these, as I said, we are actually the spirit selves. And so it's actually spiritual activities that would bring happiness to our spirit selves. And so what do spiritual activities look like? Of course, to start off with, the usual meditation, prayer. Those are definitely a great way, a first step to actually harnessing the spiritual happiness that awaits us. And so just reassessing and just asking ourselves, okay, if I've spent 2 hours in the gym, if I've spent 2 hours cooking, if I've spent 2 hours, watching something that excites me visually, how much time have I actually spent meditating and pursuing spiritual activities? And when we start to have that reassessment, we can actually change our day, change our pursuit as a whole to prioritize the pursuit of spiritual activities rather than just material. Now, we are not saying that you completely forget your material comforts. They're definitely needed because the body is the vessel of the soul. But simultaneously, we encourage you to start to spend some time, start to invest some time in spiritual activities if you really want to get to spiritual happiness that brings satisfaction to the soul. Now, some of you may revolt to this idea. Some of you may say, well, I know so many non-spiritual people that are happy. And to that, I ask the question, for how long? How long can one material comfort actually satisfy them before they're looking for something else? Right? Material happiness is short. It can provide happiness, but it's short-lived. Why settle for that? Why not go for longer, eternal, long-lasting happiness? That comes with spiritual happiness. Some of you may say, I'm satisfied with my standard of happiness. And to that I say, a pauper remains happy with a penny until he sees a pound. Why settle for pennyworth happiness, and why not go for something more rich, more deeply satiating, eternal happiness? And some of you may completely revolt to all of this and say, no, material happiness is the real happiness. And to that I say, how can a material component bring relief to a spiritual being? If we are spiritual beings, then something material cannot actually bring any sort of satisfaction to the spiritual self. Spirit and matter are like oil and water. They do not mix. And so expecting material activities to bring spiritual happiness is but a fool's folly. To conclude, this is what we talked about. The path of material happiness is actually like a vicious cycle of frustration. We identify ourselves as our bodies, subtle and gross. We pursue happiness from that sense, from that material sense. And so, given that, like the body that is temporary, this so-called material happiness is also temporary. And it ultimately takes us back to square one, where we weren't happy to begin with. To counter this, we try to pursue something else, but because we try to pursue it again through a material sense, it leads us to the same result, and this vicious cycle continues, making us more and more frustrated. The counter to that is spiritual happiness. When we understand ourselves to be the soul and pursue spiritual activities for the happiness of the soul, we actually get genuine spiritual happiness. That which is permanent, contrary to material happiness, which is temporary. And so this pursuit of spiritual happiness actually leads one to genuine satiation and fulfillment. And with that, I'd like to thank you for all of your time